Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to Monday's edition of Today in Sports Betting here for Monday, July 27th. Just as a reminder, this is going to be the recap show where we go through the just some of the action that happened over the weekend. And usually you see Scott Steen doing the intro here, but unfortunately his fever spiked again, and he is not going to be available for the video. And I'm not sure if he already uploaded his Deep 3, etc., but if he did not, most likely he will be unavailable to do so. So just wanted to give all of you a heads up. So that means I'm going to be flying solo, similarly to what I did on Saturday when I covered the NBA restart and the bubble with some props available and some news that happened with that over the weekend. But before we get into any of the recap regarding the plays for the weekend, I feel like we kind of have to address the elephant in the room, which is the massive COVID outbreak involving the Miami Marlins and the potential implications that could have on the rest of the MLB season. And overall, a lot of people are discouraged naturally because of the fact that, for example, the KBO ended up having a season for about 2-3 months, and there haven't been any issues in COVID, and yet baseball has a season for about 3 days, and one of the teams already has basically half their staff come down with it, and now you have to worry about the Phillies. If you don't know what I'm talking about, just to break it down, the Marlins ended up having a couple of players test positive over the weekend, most notably being Jose Uriah, who is Urena, who is one of their best pitchers on the staff. But according to some reports this morning, roughly a dozen or so players and coaches ended up testing positive for COVID. And as a result, for a precautionary measure, the Phillies game against the Yankees tonight was canceled because the Phillies just played against the Marlins for 3 straight days. So they figured they shouldn't want to take any chances. They wanted to prevent the potential outbreak. And for that reason, the Yankees-Phillies game got canceled for tonight while the Phillies potentially get retested before being able to face the New York Yankees. As for the Marlins, that's a completely separate issue, and I'm not really sure what they're going to do in order to try to save the season. From what I've heard so far is that the Marlins are going to be looking for replacement players naturally. How are they going to get the replacement players? I don't know. Since there are no minor leagues this season, you could potentially just contact a bunch of minor leaguers who are now unemployed to send them up to form some type of ragtag replacement team. That's an option. You could sign a bunch of free agents, perhaps. I don't know if they're going to be in shape, etc. A lot of question marks with that. But the Marlins, if they want to continue the season, basically have no choice but to sign 10 to 15 unemployed players right now, and to try to just keep the schedule intact and to hope that everything works out without them turning into a laughingstock before all the players return from COVID in roughly, a week or two, give or take. But a lot of people are arguing, saying that baseball, specifically the MLB, should just shut down and cut its losses. And even though I can understand the point that they're trying to make, in reality, I don't think it's really necessary. What you have to remember is that the Marlins and the Phillies were completely separated from all the other teams. So as long as you just quarantine the Marlins and the Phillies for roughly a week or two, all of the other teams should just be able to continue playing no problem. And that's why you haven't heard any other games in the MLB canceled at this point in time. Of course, it's not a good look for the MLB when you've played 3 days and one of your teams has already basically all come down with the virus. But when it comes to shutting down the entire league, I don't think that's really necessary because of the fact that people have become a little bit more familiar with what COVID actually is, unlike the NBA and how they shut down the Gobert situation because they had no idea what type of virus they were actually dealing with at that time. The thing about baseball is that people have already taken some necessary precautions, wearing masks all the time, hopefully. Some people are still stubborn about that because they're morons, but most of the people have already started to realize how to prevent the illness, and the MLB's taken a lot of money out in order to constantly test for COVID. So they have done some, precautionary measures, which is why I feel like the MLB believes that they have the knowledge about the illness to continue the season with the same careful methods that, they've been doing to try to prevent the outbreak in the first place. Clearly, whatever methods those were aren't working, as the Marlins ended up testing positive. But, you still have a lot of other healthier teams. Ratings are still going to be pretty good. It's a matter of, does the MLB prioritize money over the potential safety of the players? And the answer is obviously yes. because if they didn't prioritize money, they probably wouldn't have started the season in the first place. So if you factor that in, do I think the MLB season is going to continue? Yes. Do I think it should continue? I think you can make that argument either way. So I'm not going to pick a side because I feel like you can make an argument both ways. And you're 3 games into a 60-game season, not including playoffs. Is it really worth it to continue the season? I don't know. But considering the fact the MLB basically had a labor strike, organized a unique set of playoff rules, organized some specific extra innings rules just to create this season to try to make sure it goes through, they clearly only care about the money. And I feel like based on that, I would expect to see the regular season go full steam ahead, ignoring the Marlins and the Phillies. Phillies potentially can play if, they come back negative. But the Marlins are going to be shut down for probably a week or two. And I don't know how they're going to make up those games, which is kind of interesting because the Marlins are tied for first place in the National League East. Of course, they have no chance of actually making the playoffs, but it's going to be really weird if you're going to be leaving a team behind while the other teams continue playing, which is even weirder because of the fact you have an even number of teams. So you literally have to have one other team basically getting a bye for 3 days, whoever's supposed to play the Marlins, et cetera, which I don't know how that's going to work out. But I expect the Marlins to sign a bunch of minor league scrubs to try to fill a roster, some potential people who were cut, at least lately. I don't think they're going to go after KBO people or anything like that, but I'd expect them to go after the free agent market, go after some minor leaguers who are now unemployed, try to fill the roster, and try to get back to completing a full 60-game season, especially for TV ratings purposes. I know the Marlins weren't going to sell out games anyway, but there's no fans. People, at least I hope for Miami's sake, we're actually watching games, because if not, I don't know how they're making money, and they're probably hemorrhaging funds. But anyway, that's my brief rant on baseball. So based on everything that I've gathered about the situation, of course, it's very discouraging being 3 games into a season, having one of your teams pretty much entirely test positive. But in reality, do I think it's going to shut down the rest of baseball season? No. Baseball was so focused on getting a restart, even with all the labor disagreements and the uncertainty of the virus at that point in time. And they basically ignored it because they wanted to get a season done as quickly as possible. And I think that one team who hasn't been in contact with any other teams besides the Phillies, I don't think that's going to shut down the rest of the league. I think the other teams will continue because they have no contact with the Phillies or the Marlins. And then they're going to test the Phillies and Marlins and work from there. But until then, the only thing you really need to know is that the Marlins are in serious trouble, and the Phillies game against the Yankees tonight got canceled. And in terms of the actual series, we'll see how that goes. But other than that, though, we're going to transition talking about some of the plays over the weekend. Overall, pretty good. If you want to talk about the Today in Sports betting shows that we ended up doing with some picks, mostly revolved around golf and UFC, and I will recap those and the events as a whole, starting right now. For golf, the winner was Thompson, who was roughly 100 to 1, 125 to 1. It's his first PGA Tour victory in several years. Performed really well, managed to hold the fort on Sunday. You had Tony Finau, who was in the hunt, but of course it's Tony Finau, so he obviously didn't win. Still priced as roughly, I'd say, what was he, the second favorite, the third favorite in this tournament? He hasn't won a tournament since 2016. Yeah, not great, but you could have easily hedged if you took him over the first couple of days before. I don't want to say fading him on Sunday because he performed decently on Sunday, but he didn't do well enough to actually win the tournament. As a whole, though, going through the plays, some outrights on Matthew Wolff, who performed really well on Sunday, but he came up short at 33 to 1. You had Sam Burns at 60 to 1. He finished, I believe, 31st or 32nd. You had Norlander, who did really well, finished within the top 30 at 66 to 1, but he didn't win the thing. My fade on Koepka worked out really well. I had Koepka to miss the cut at plus 350 on FanDuel. I had Dustin Johnson over Koepka. That was a disaster. Dustin Johnson had back issues after he was shooting. What was he shooting? He was a plus 8, I believe, after day 1, and then he just decided to go home. Probably the right move. I had Tony Finau over Koepka at minus 120 on BetOnline. That was a sweat-free winner, as Koepka missed the cut and Finau finished top 10. I had Sam Burns top 30 at plus 160 on FanDuel. Bit of a tough beat there. He was roughly 25th, and then he ended up bogeying the second to last hole. Finished tied for 32nd. Unfortunate there. And then I had Norlander top 40 at plus 100 on FanDuel, and he finished in the top 30. So overall, 3-5 for plus 2.83 units in golf. Solid weekend as a whole for golf. I kind of wish Burns made top 30. Would have been a 2.6 unit swing. Would have finished roughly plus 5.4 units. But at the end of the day, anytime you're roughly three units of profit, you take that to the bank. So good times in golf. And looking at the UFC, also pretty successful on the card. Going through all of the fights that I had plays on, I only had roughly, what I have, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. I had 6 plays. I had Wood inside the distance. That started the card off as a loser as he won by decision. I had Evloev by decision. He ended up winning by unanimous decision at plus 137. I had Aspinall by knockout at plus 162 on Fox Bet. He ended up winning by first round knockout. I had a 2-pick parlay with Chimaev inside the distance and Gustafsson rounds 1 or 2 at plus 225 for half a unit. That ended up losing as Gustafsson lost outright to Verdum. I had Esparza and Till over 2.5 rounds in their respective fights in a parlay, which led to a minus 114 payout on Fox Bet, which turned out to be a nice winner. And I also had Gustafsson fight to end in 60 seconds, half a unit at plus 850 on Fox Bet. That fight ended in roughly 2.5 minutes, so I was off by pretty close. I was off by about a minute and a half. But for the overall recap, went 3-3 for plus 1.87 units. So if you factor in UFC and golf, made roughly around 4.7 units. So it was a pretty solid day on Saturday. Pretty solid weekend for sports. Baseball for my individual plays could have gone a little bit better, and I acknowledge that. But as a whole, profitable weekend, and hopefully that'll continue over into this week. Now, to go through, I pretty much covered everything with golf, and there wasn't much else to say because Koepka was one of the main stories coming out with the injury, but he ended up playing anyway, missed the cut. His brother made the cut, though, which is one of the first I've ever seen Chase Koepka finish ahead of Brooks Koepka. Finau played well, not well enough. Dustin Johnson, I don't know how serious the back injury is, or if he just cited it because he didn't want to play Friday, knowing that he had no chance of making the cut. Either way, that's definitely a possibility. I would not play Johnson in the future. I think he's probably going to take the week off leading up to the PGA, but it is definitely something that is worth keeping in mind. I will probably fade Koepka moving forward, as even though he shot 1 under in a birdie fest tournament, not a great performance, missed a lot of easy putts, had some issues with his accuracy off the tee. Big concern there. I still think Koepka should have taken the week off, especially if his knee is actually bothering him so much as he claims. But switching over to the UFC, very entertaining card as you ended up having 15 fights. One of the first times, I'd say, in a couple of weeks that you had no fighters cancel either due to weight or COVID. So that definitely was optimistic. That definitely was a good sign. Going through some of the fights here, I'll start with the prelims of anybody who stood out. Looking at everything, didn't really have any issues with the judges, by the way. I know that has been a huge topic for bettors and how some of the UFC judges have kind of gone off the reservation and how one judge will go AWOL and make some questionable decisions. There was maybe a questionable judge or two, but as a whole, I thought that all of the decisions were accurate. I didn't think there was anybody who got robbed in that fight, particularly the Shogun fight against Nogueira. Some people were arguing that Nogueira won. I thought Rua clearly won 29-28, so that didn't surprise me. I was pretty happy that the judges didn't butcher that because I thought that Shogun did win the fight. You can make the argument Nogueira had success in the earlier parts of the rounds, but Rua basically ended up on top of him for two of the 3 rounds, which I thought swayed it in pretty close rounds. As a whole, the fight was very entertaining between Rua and Nogueira. I still don't think that fight should have happened as the co-main event on a card. I think that's ridiculous. I think that fight probably belonged in Bellator, as both fighters had a combined age north of 80. But good fight. I'm not really sure why, though, you would throw a third fight between 2 fighters when Rua won by decision the first 2 times. And naturally, Shogun swept the series with 3 division victories. Is what it is. Nogueira retired. Probably the right move. Shogun wants to keep fighting. Good luck to him for that. I'll definitely fade him in his next fight because I don't think he has much left in the tank. But looking through some other notable performances, you had Bozer, who won after a very interesting, basically an eyes closed hook where his knuckle landed in Pessoa's eye and Pessoa fell down as quickly as possible, and that fight ended. That was a pretty entertaining knockout. Aspinall absolutely destroyed Collier. I had money on that, decent amount. I also had some parlays with Aspinall in there. Collier, I can't blame him. You move from heavyweight to heavyweight and you gain roughly 50 pounds, and you're fighting against a guy who's supposed to be a decent prospect making his UFC debut. That's going to be a pretty tough contest, and Collier got clocked in 45 seconds and went down. Good win by Ronson against Dalby. Dalby started off well, pretty decent favorite, and Ronson ended up getting the job done as an underdog. Trinaldo performed well. Herb Dean just let Trinaldo tee off on Herbert probably more than he needed to. I thought that after Herbert fell down in such an awkward fashion, he could have stopped it right there. But Trinaldo stopped. He showed good sportsmanship. Herb Dean didn't step in, and he threw a couple more punches before it ended. Chimaev was ridiculous once again. You got to give him a serious contender at this point. He's fought twice in 10 days. He's outstruck his opponents. I believe it's 192-2. He was faced with 0 strikes against McKee. He basically picked up McKee in 10 seconds, carried McKee over to his corner, and then beat him up for about 3 minutes. It was one of the most dominating performances in the UFC, especially after the last performance. Just give him a serious contender. I don't really care who it is in welterweight. Just throw him somebody with a number next to their name and let him fight a contender. Because you can make the argument he's worth a top 5 guy right now. This guy has potential title fighter all over him. He's the Khabib of the welterweight division, and you have to treat him as such, especially if you want him to potentially bring in some serious pay-per-view numbers, etc. Because even though he wrestles people and he does what Khabib does, he fights the way a lot of people think Usman should fight, where he wrestles people and he punches people, but in a very entertaining way that it's not boring, as opposed to Usman, who just sits on people for about 5 minutes and does absolutely nothing besides stomp on people's toes. They both win. Chimaev's just more entertaining, and I expect Chimaev to get a serious contender in his next fight. Other than that, though, Oliveira looks fantastic against Sabata. Really just wasn't even a contest. Sabata just looked like a deer in the headlights. He wasn't sure what to do, and Oliveira picked him apart in the stand-up. Paul Craig, the Bear Jew, got the win by submission. Nice win there. Esparza won by decision. Shocker. Esparza's a good fighter. She bores me to death, and I really hope that she just gets put on the prelim in the future. That won't happen because she was the inaugural champion in the weight division, so she has some cachet in the UFC. Her fights are just a guarantee to go to a decision. The fight was entertaining. The fight was a split. I thought Esparza clearly won 29-28, but I find her fights pretty boring. That fight was somewhat entertaining because Esparza kept going for really dumb submissions at the end of rounds 1 and 2. He got clocked in the head. But Esparza, good for her for winning. I have no interest in watching any of her fights. That fight was on the more watchable side of hers. Other than that, Verdum had a nice upset victory against Gustafsson. Kind of surprised me after Verdum looked so lost against Oleinik in his first fight. But he won by submission halfway through the first round. Gustafsson looked good in the stand-up for the first 2 minutes, got taken down, and Verdum ended up locking in the armbar, and Gustafsson had no answers. And you had the Rua fight, which I mentioned, and then the last but not least, you had a pretty entertaining main event between Whitaker and Till. Weren't any thrilling moments per se, besides the elbow by Till in the 5th round and Till's knockdown in the 1st round. I thought Whitaker won the fight. I thought that was a solid scoring by the judges. I had 48-47, and that is what all the judges had as well. You can make the argument for Whitaker either winning the 5th round, which Till performed pretty well with the elbow, but Whitaker had some takedowns late. I thought he won. I thought Whitaker won the 2nd round, the 3rd round, and the 5th round, and I gave Till the 1st round and the 4th round. But Whitaker looked great. Till looked really good, very technical, but Whitaker is just a little bit better all around, especially in the takedown department. So I think that's where he won some of the judges over. Overall, very successful card for the last series of fights at Fight Island, and hopefully some other fights will, look as entertaining as some of these. But other than that, though, you have the NBA starting up later this week, and that kind of brings you to the other topic going on the NBA, which is, does a strip club count as a personal emergency? And the answer is probably not. Lou Williams found that out the hard way as he asked for an excused absence from the bubble and then was ratted out by some other people he bumped into at a strip club And, yeah, he tried to play it off, claiming they were old photos or old videos. I'm not talking about Lou Williams, I'm talking about I believe I don't remember if he was a rapper or it's some other social influencer who was with him in the club. Meanwhile, Lou Williams has a mask over his head, etc. And yet the guy's claiming they were old videos and photos. Yeah, not exactly ideal. I doubt that Williams was wearing a medical mask into a strip club about 6 months ago. So, that defense doesn't really hold water, so to speak. But Lou Williams ended up getting put in 10-day quarantine, which means he will be missing the first 2 seeding games for the restart. I mentioned the potential of that over the weekend with the NBA restart plays, and I talked about the Clippers under and how I wasn't sure what the status was going to be for Lou Williams, for Patrick Beverley and Montrezl Harrell for the reseed games and how they might miss a couple. Williams is missing 2. First game's against the Lakers. That's probably going to be a loss. So over 5.5, definitely not looking great if you have to go 6-2, give or take, or better, and you're playing the Lakers in your first game. Not ideal, especially with Lou Williams being one of the best bench players in the entire league. Patrick Beverley is making his return, so we should be ready for the start of the season. Not sure about Montrezl Harrell, so keep your eyes focused on that one, because if he is out, that could potentially move the spread another half point or so. So keep that in mind. But not really much news to talk about in the NBA. I know Sabonis got injured, which is unfortunate for the Pacers. They're basically screwed now. I didn't think they had much of a chance to begin with. But maybe Oladipo now not fully returned. He's still up in the air because Sabonis is out. But COVID hasn't been an issue for the NBA players. Seems like the bubble's been working out, and you have that restart later on this week. Same thing with the NHL. Haven't really heard much news about the restart, which is a good thing. The last thing you want to do is hear news about restarts. That usually means that it's either falling apart or somebody's doing something dumb against protocol. But the NBA and the NHL have been relatively quiet in terms of bad news, which is a good sign. Baseball exploded, but, that happens. But we'll see what happens, and it definitely should be a very solid week. Hopefully Scott Steen will be back tomorrow. Not really sure what we're going to be doing for the rest of the week, but we'll come up with something, and I'm sure all of you will be pleased with the content coming out here with Winners and Whiners. Once again, though, if you want other stuff to look at, you have my play of the days that are coming out. You have Scott Steen's Deep 3, which are coming out. You also have a lot of articles on pretty much every single game that's been happening in sports on winnersandwhiners.com and statsvault.com. So if you want some other opinions about games, you have a lean on something, but you want another opinion about it, don't be afraid to check out winnersandwhiners.com. We have you covered there. But other than that, though, I wanted to thank all of you for tuning in to the Monday edition of Today in Sports Betting for July 27th. If you enjoyed the show, please like and subscribe to Winners and Whiners if you haven't done so already. And if you want to talk or message me about any questions you have about sports or any plays, etc., just message me in the comment section below, and I'll be glad to answer. But good luck to all of you and your respective bets today. Bye, everyone.